so also for this meeting time, this isn't going to be like a lecture type thing. I like discussion. We're going to have intentional discussion time at your tables after we're done speaking, because to me, in the end, it's also important to know we have people around us that are all in the same boat, same shoes, fill in the blank, whatever correlation you want to use. But we're all trying to do this, and we're all just trying to get through this life, right? And we're trying to raise our kids to be God-fearing adults one day. And so that's the whole purpose of these next 4 weeks, is to engage in that. And how can we engage? And so we use the word calibrate because I'm a nerd. But really, when it comes to like printing, whenever you want to make sure your colors are right? In the CMYK, you use these colors to make sure that things are calibrated correctly. And so if we calibrate what we do, our interactions with our kids, then Lord willing, that will give you a better chance of success. And success we mean by engaging with your kids, right? And so it's been very interesting as we prep for this class. We've been teaching through the book of Judges in student ministry, and we covered Jephthah, who was a judge that came from a poor family background, and we covered Samson today, who came from a great family background. And to me, that gives me hope as a parent, because Jephthah had no parental involvement, and God used him greatly. Samson had terrific family involvement, and he failed utterly and miserably, repeatedly. And so being a parent, there's no formula. There's no specific formula that's going to give you guaranteed success that your kid's going to become the next Apostle Paul, right? In the end, we're supposed to point our kids to Jesus, teach them about God, teach them about the Word of God. And so what can we do to do that? And it was interesting when I was meeting with my team. For me personally, I like task lists. And so I'm like, oh, we need to talk about social media. We need to talk about sexuality. We need to talk about freedom, this and that. And it was really interesting because Paul Hughes was like, this is all great, but how are we wanting to do this? Are we wanting to do task list stuff, or do we really want to get to the heart of the issue? And I was like, that's why God put you on this team. I mean, really. And so that's what these next 4 weeks are going to be about. It's about, the heart of the student and understanding and connecting with your kid, because the reality is, if your kid doesn't know you and you don't really know your kid well, it's not going to matter all these things you know to teach them. And so you have to have that connection point with your student before you can try to get to the point of spiritual things. And I say this because many times I have parents come up to me and say, my child is wrestling with their faith. Can you tell me what to do? And it's because we think that there's this specific thing we need to do to fix, right? There's this task list that we need to do. And my response was, well, let me ask you this. How's your kid doing? Do you talk to your kid and ask them still, what do they want to be when they grow up? How's your relationship with your student? Because again, if your student comes to you and you don't have that relationship, it doesn't matter what you tell them. The reality is they're not going to at least take everything you say. So, what do you guys think about this number? What do you think, it means? Besides being a really cool hipster font.
Divided by 2 and times by 2.
Right? Excuse me?
I was with the threes with what she was doing.
I didn't even think about that. Public schooled. But being part Chinese, I'm sure my cousins invented this number somehow. No, but in 936 weeks, from the moment your child is born until they are 18 and leave the house, you have 936 weeks with your kid. So think about that for a second. It's like, it sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot, right? And so we're gearing things towards like middle school and high school. So if you have a 6th grader, you have 364 weeks before they leave the house. 7th and 8th grade is 312 weeks. 9th grade, a little over 200. 10th grade, 150. 11th grade, 104. And 12th grade, 52. To me, even just prepping that, really, it was very sobering to see, like, oh my gosh. So for those that don't know, my wife and I, we have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old. And my daughter's in 7th grade and my son's in 4th grade. I always forget. For the longest time, I told him he was in like 5th grade and he was in like 3rd. If I could do one thing over, I would know who my son is now. But again, we have a very limited amount of time before our children leave the house. And the whole purpose of parenting is to prepare them well, so at the end of 936 weeks, you can have faith that they're going to respond well to this world because of their rootedness in Christ. And so today we're going to talk about identity, right? Our identity, obviously, we are renewed in Christ. We are a new creation. But as parents, there are some things we want to understand about our identity. And if you look in your booklets, there's some Bible passages, and I'm not going to read them all to you. But I love Galatians 6:9. I'm going to grab this real quick. Actually, I'll read a couple of them to you. Would have made sense if I would have put this in my presentation. So this is kind of the passage that is going to be the overarching theme for these gatherings is, so let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Right? And to me, those words are so powerful that Paul wrote to the church of Galatia now. Right? We're not the church of Galatia, but this is a parenting concept right here, right? Don't give up. Don't give up. Even when you feel hopeless, don't give up. Keep doing what you're doing. And just one more. In Colossians 3:23, work willingly at whatever you do as though you were working for the Lord rather than people. Right? We parent not to raise our kids. We parent because it is a form of worship to our Creator God. And so if remember that, we want to approach parenting with excellence at all times. Now, does that mean we're going to? No, not always. There's a lot of times when I get home from work and I just want to go to the bedroom and be left alone. And my kids are like, Dad, what's up? I'm like, oh, right? And again, prepping for this, I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, I need to seize those moments because I only have 300 weeks with my daughter left, right? And so thinking about that, it's so weird. Kids grow up too fast. And so today in identity, understanding what our role as a parenting is, but really your student's identity. And we're not going to talk about their identity in Christ because we know what that is, but who is your student? Do you really know your child? Right? Because no two kids are alike. My daughter and my son are completely opposite. Right? My daughter is the outgoing one that could talk to a wall and do whatever, while my son can put on this facade of being outgoing, but he really prefers to just stay at home in his room. It's funny because anytime I get home, I'm like, hey, who wants to go run errands with Daddy? And my daughter's like, I'll go. And my son's like, I just want to stay home. Right? Or even like the other day, we had like 3 errands to run. And he's like, nope, I'm only good for 1, Dad. Right? And so we'll go and we'll get to our next destination. He's like, I just want to go home. And so these are things that I'm learning to understand because it allows me to engage with my kids better. And so we're going to talk, there's going to be some science behind what we do because God created science, and so science is okay to use when it comes to parenting. It allows you to understand your kid better. And so we're going to kind of go back and forth between some things that regard middle school students and high school students. So we'll go back and forth, but I will be sure to make sure you guys know who I'm describing or what not. And so if we get to a point where you have a question or need me to repeat something or give clarification, feel free to do that because that's what we do. So middle schoolers, in regards to identity, their biggest insecurity is the word acceptance. And what do I mean by that? Well, they need affirmation. Right? They'll ask questions like this. Who am I? Who do I like? Who likes me? Right, acceptance is very important to them, and which is crazy because as they are growing from children into preteens, into teens, into young adults to adults, their minds and brains go through all of these different emotions, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But they need this affirmation because it gives them stability. Right, there's nothing more scary than going from being the king of the hill in 5th grade, going into 6th grade to being the bottom of the pond. Ocean? What's the right word? Barrel.
Bottom of the barrel.
Bottom of the barrel. That's not what is said in my fortune cookie. Good. Thank you for laughing at that. That would have been an interesting HR conversation that I would have to have. But also, when you know and understand your child, when they're in middle school, things aren't just black and white for them now. They start to have some gray in the way they see things and perceive things. And so whereas we can just be like, well, this is the answer, that's great, but they don't see everything in black and white anymore. So understanding that they're starting to see gray in things, even if it's a black and white issue, it allows you to understand how to interact with them on these issues and subjects. They want to learn and recognize their own uniqueness in this as they're trying to be accepted. They want to be seen by others. And so a couple things about 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, which is really interesting. Again, their black and white thinking expands into gray. They start to understand how to empathize with others better as they're developing that emotion. And they experience these complex emotions, but because they have a desire to fit in, they will ignore those a lot of times in order to be accepted. What that means is they have their uniqueness and their individualisticness, but a lot of times they will put that aside just so they can fit in. Which is really important for us as parents to understand and recognize that they're already fighting a battle to try to fit in. And so when we try to force them and tell them that they have to, usually there's going to be a lot of resistance met with that. And so again, how can we engage them to encourage them in that aspect? 7th and 8th grade, this is where it's really interesting, is scientifically, this is the most deceitful age. This is when they will lie the most to you. Kids will always lie, don't get me wrong, and they will stop lying to you at some point too. But 7th and 8th grade is really when they typically will be the most deceitful with you, because they're beginning to use emotion and intellect and reason with everything that they're trying to do. Again, their brain is firing on all these different aspects, and so all these new emotions and things of what they're trying to do and understand is coming to play. So what about high schoolers? High schoolers desire freedom. From the minute they leave 8th grade, and it is so interesting as we watch our students go from 8th grade into 9th grade, you can see that they have a desire for freedom. They want to be able to do what they want to do, right? Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And so how do we adjust that? Well, the questions that high school students ask in regards to wanting to do freedom is they ask, where do I belong? Right? Because after middle school, if they know who they are or who likes them, then they need to know where do they belong next. Why should I believe? Why should I believe all this stuff that you're telling me? Why should I believe what I learned in children's church growing up? Why should I have a Christian worldview on everything? How can I matter? Do I matter? Does what I do or think really matter in this world? What will I do? All right, when this 936 weeks is up, what will I do? You see, they ask about belonging because they want to connect with a group, which shows you the importance of community. Why should they believe? We shouldn't discourage our kids when they ask that question. You know, I think a lot of old traditional church ways in the past is, you just believe because we said so. That doesn't work anymore. Right? It's a new day and age, and it's okay. Because guess what? In the Bible, I promise you, there were people that questioned God, what He was doing. And so to me, if people question God in a way that they want to grow their faith and understand God better, then we need to allow our children to do that very thing. You see, that's the issue where we struggle as parents, is because of everything you've taught in, everything you've learned in children's ministry, student ministry, then you should be good to go. No, that's not always the case. We do these things so they can start to understand a little better about why they believe and whatnot. How can they matter? They really want to make a difference. And so we have to give them opportunities to live into making a difference. Right? Our kids are all different. And so how can we find what are they passionate about and live into that? Right? Because when you are engaged and living passionately about things, you're going to be more excited about spiritual things. If I love music, and I can play in a band, or I can listen to this music, or I can write music, then I'm going to connect with God a lot better than as if I'm just told to go read a book. Right? You have to understand how that works. And then lastly, again, what will I do is, where am I headed? How can you encourage them to have new experiences to prepare them for what's next? And when I say give them new experiences, is like not just doing the same old, but having them do things that are going to challenge them to grow. And so from a standpoint of a high schooler, how can you challenge them to have experiences? That's what, have they gone on a mission trip to learn about that, to understand? Have they gone on retreats to be in community with others? What are experiences they can have in regards to the faith to prepare them for the next step? And if you don't know those experiences, come up with them. Work with them on it. And so, going back to middle school and understanding the brain and whatnot, middle schoolers, and I read this, their minds are like engineers. They have lots and lots of ideas and things they want to do. They just don't know how to process it and put it together yet. Right? Lots of great ideas, lots of abstract ideas, but they can't put all the pieces together because their brain is still developing. They don't have that concreteness yet. High schoolers, they're like philosophers. Right? The question, who, what, when, why, where, how now, are the questions they like to ask. Again, why should I believe? Why does this matter? What is the purpose of this? You know, a lot of times, our daughter now, as she is venturing into this, she'll ask the question, well, why am I doing this, Dad? Because you need to be obedient. Right? That answer works with a middle schooler sometimes. With a high schooler, it's not going to always work. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. So what can we do with middle schoolers and high schoolers in regards to their identity? Write this down. With a middle schooler, listen frequently to them. Don't blow them off. When they come up to you and want to tell you about something they read or did, listen to them. Hear what they have to say. Because if you blow them off, they won't come to you. At some point, they'll stop. And the last thing you want is for a high school student to stop coming to you. So if you establish that with them as a middle school kid, even an elementary age kid, it shows that you have interest in what they're doing, even if it doesn't matter to you. And we're going to address that in a second as well. Encourage them specifically. Don't just say, good job today. Encourage them specifically. Let them know what they did well, what you saw them do. It's so interesting because on our middle school trips, we do encouragement time at the end of the days. And we'll say, hey, so-and-so, you did an amazing job sitting down with that kid today, making them feel welcome. You did an amazing job interacting and helping prepare for the lesson today. Because they know that you see them. And they know specifically that you saw what they did and that you value that. Our middle school students need that affirmation. And then last, you got to guide patiently. That's not very easy, right? It's never easy. And I imagine for some in this room that have grown kids, it's still not easy. But you got to be patient with them. Because remember, they're preteens. They're trying to figure out what's going on with their lives. As they are literally going through these physical, emotional, and mental changes, we have to be patient with them. So what do we do with our high school students then in those regards? Again, collaborate with them. Figure out boundaries with them. Don't just say, this is how it's going to be. What can it be? Why should it be like this? Can you give me a compelling reason? Right? You are still the authority in your student's life. But again, you get by a lot more if you have discussions with them. But if you didn't listen frequently when they're middle school students, you won't have the possibility to have these discussions go well. Right? Give them opportunities. And what I mean by that, allow them to earn your trust. Right? Let them prove they can be trusted. So here's some science stuff for you guys, because this legitimizes what we're doing today. If I give you, but the brain, right? The brain is the core of how we process things at the end. And so on the left side, we got the middle school brain. It's all these different colors, right? It is literally like that movie Inside Out. Was that what it was called? A Disney movie, and their brains going crazy. That is literally what your middle school student's brain is doing. You have all these new neurons and synapses that are overproducing, and they have no idea how to process it, which is why they think abstractly great, which is why they have all these great ideas, but they have no idea how to tie it together. Right? And so because of that, we need to come alongside them. They have a ton of great ideas. How can we funnel that into one thing? And so when you engage with a middle school student, the most important thing is simple rules, simple explanations. Let me see what I wrote down right here specifically. All right, I can't see it in my notes. But give them a simple task. Which is, so VBS is a time when we come together as a church body. When we train our middle school students, when we train our adult volunteers and working with our middle school students, we are key on telling them, give them simple tasks. They will get them done. If you tell this student, I need you to get these 700 things done for me in these next few hours, they're not going to get any of it done. But if you're saying, I need this task, and I need this task, and this task, then they're going to be able to process that a lot better. That's how you help them process these things. And so, what about a high schooler's brain? All right, now that you've gone through the craziness of middle school, their brain settles down, right? No, the craziness is just in different aspects. And so we have in our brains what's called this gray matter. And so as they get older, every year they lose 1% of that. And what that means is that allows their prefrontal cortex to grow better. What is this called right here? Their limbic system. What that is that increases as well. And so as their brain is learning to process things better, their risk-taking is developing at a faster rate too, right? Which is why they don't always see things. So what that means is the limbic system, it helps them understand that they want to take more risks. It's developing at a faster rate than the prefrontal cortex, which regulates their behavior, right? So a lot of times, that was really stupid, why'd you do that? I don't know. Because that's developing faster than the sense that stuff that's supposed to make sense. So when you have a teenager that does something really stupid, and I'm sorry, some of them are in my 242 group because I lead them the wrong way sometimes. I might participate with them, but why'd you do that? Oh, this seemed fun. I mean, we get that a lot from our boys, right?
Chang said to.
Right? Chang says, treasures in heaven. No, but really, that's really why a lot of things when they do, like, why'd you jump off that roof? I mean, really. And so, I mean, scientifically that makes a lot of sense, and we need to understand that sometimes I'm just going to do it. This might be really crazy and stupid, or I'm just going to do it anyways.
You have to yell parkour before you do it.
Yes, parkour. Parkour! We'll have a refrigerator box outside to jump into afterwards. So for those that don't know, I love The Office, and so I will probably give Office references in here. So in the spiritual journey, going back to middle school, this would be something good to write down. What can you as a parent do to affirm their faith? There are two very important things that must be done. It must be done. The first one is to start teaching them that they need to own their own faith. That has to begin in middle school. Everything they've learned for the last 5 years, they learn concrete facts and things. But now in middle school, they must learn that this is their own faith. This is not mom and dad's faith that I believe. And the second one is they have to learn the value of community, Christian community. They have a desire to want to fit in, but if we don't give them those aspects to have a chance to even fit in, then we're going to be missing out on that. Because if community is not, there's no value in community or an emphasis on community for them when they get to high school and you're wondering why they're not involved in 242 or other things, it's because you didn't show that it was important to them beforehand. That's not always easy though, right? But those are musts that you should do with your middle school students. Let them find community. And not just any community, right? If we want to live into our Christian calling as parents, they need to find community with other believers. Like-minded people running the race in the same direction. So then what do we do with high school students? We need to mobilize them. They're getting ready to be launched out. 936 weeks is almost done. We mobilize them by teaching them the importance of pursuing an authentic faith. Right? You've handed the baton off to them with everything you know about the Lord. It's time for them to start pursuing that as well. And so you have to encourage them to do that. And the way to do that, again, is allowing them to be a part of Christian community, being involved with other believers. Which is why we stress that 242 is so important. Because even in the craziness of their everyday work week, we know at least that 2 hours right there, they're going to be with like-minded people, pressing on together. And then you mobilize them by allowing them to find out a personal mission, something that they should do, they want to accomplish. See, if you allow them to verbalize and dictate what they're passionate about, it's going to be much easier as you're getting ready to launch them to guide them in that direction, to give them counsel to go into that direction.
Can you give some examples? Personal mission.
Of what?
Personal mission.
Personal mission? I love to work with planes. Therefore, I can go and be a missionary across the world. Right? I enjoy writing music. Therefore, I can sit down and cultivate that gift with someone. So it's, again, finding out what their passions are and then showing them options to live into. And not just, and I'm glad you asked that question because it gives me some clarity, give you guys some clarity. It's not just real world, like after I graduate from college, what can I do? But what can I do for the sake of the glory of God with that? That's a great question, Ashley. I'm glad you asked that. Would have hated to miss that point. Seth Wilson, who was in my last 242 group, wants to be an engineer, but he also kind of wants to go into ministry maybe. I said, do both. I said, guess what? Get your engineering degree. And guess what? You can go across the world. There are places where they can use your engineering gifts, and you can use that for the work of the Lord. Or just forget it all and go into ministry full time. Disregard all of it. Let God laugh at your plans. But see, I think that's one thing when it comes to launching your students well, and we're talking about high school specifically, is we have such desires that we want them to accomplish this task, this task, this task. But for our identity as parents, our one task that we want them to accomplish is to be followers, faithful followers of Jesus. And so whether they do that in a secular work world or whether they do that through vocational ministry, that's what matters. And I think if we approach parenting from that standpoint, then we can let go of these things that society tells us how our kids should grow up and the things they should want to accomplish. And so we're going to wrap up soon, so we're going to let you guys have some discussion. So because of all of this, because of wanting to understand your kid better, there are 4 questions that we want you guys to start wrestling with and kind of talk about at your tables. And these 4 questions is going to be what's going to guide these next few weeks of how this class will look. And so the first one is, your student is asking you, imagine this is your kid talking to you. Do you know what matters to me? Well, what does that mean? Do you know what I enjoy doing? Do you know what makes me laugh? Do you know what I want to be when I grow up? Do you see me? You see, if we know what matters to our kids, then they're gonna see the worth that we see in them. Right? It validates themselves to us. It shows them that we care. Even if it's something you hate doing. Right? My son right now, he loves Bakugans. I don't even know what the heck that is, but I let him show me his toys and we interact with him and he shows me what they do because I want him to be able to come to me 4 years down the road and be able to have that openness, knowing that I sat down, and he knows that I don't really care about it. He knows I don't, because I'm like, that's really lame. But he knows that I'm willing to sit down with him and interact with him on that. Don't say those words exactly. Right? We'll figure out how to edit that a little better. And so let me give you this passage from 1 Peter 5:7. You can just write these down. I'm not going to read them to you. But 1 Peter 5:7, right? God knows you and He values you. If God cares about the details of your students' lives, then we need to care about the details of our students' lives. Luke 12:7, I know you, I created you. You're more valuable than the birds. So we need to feel that way about our kids. The next question your student is going to ask you is, do you know where I live? Yes, at my house. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about physical location, but when your student asks you, do you know where I live? He's asking you, do you know where I am socially? Do you know where I am emotionally? Or where I am culturally? Do you know what's going on in my world? Right? That's why it's so important to know the apps and things that our kids engage with, or understand what's going on in pop culture, because that is really what takes their minds. It needs to be what's cool on YouTube, right? Do you know where they live? You see, we can't assume our students feel a certain way until we know their world, right? Because a lot of times we just assume that they feel this way, but we have no idea. If you know where they are, you will understand better why they feel the way they do. That's why we can't always just give the answers to suck it up, buttercup, deal with it. If we understand where they live, we'll be able to address those things better. So we have to take the time to understand our students in their everyday context. Right? Just like we read the Word of God, we got to understand the context. We got to understand the context of where our kids live. This is the one that kills me the most when I interact with our students. Do you know what I've done?
Yes.
Right? Because when they mess up, they know they messed up. So the guilt and shame they feel is even more magnified to me than sometimes for us as adults. They're riddled with guilt a lot of times. And so when we respond to our student, which I'm so excited this is going to be one of the things we're going to talk on, is you need to respond to your student in a way that hope replaces shame. Hope is the way you react to your student when they talk to you about what they've done. Your student needs to know, they need to know that they are not the mistakes that they have made. You know, in Psalm 136:1, it says that God's love doesn't fail, nor does it change towards them. We see that in Romans 8, right? Nothing can separate you from the love of God. So again, if God's not going to love your kid any less, then we can't love our kid any less. Even when they do things that really peeve us off and are really stupid and really make sense for us to be mad at them. But we need to remember hope over shame. And the last one is this. Do you know what I can do? You are your child's biggest cheerleader. There is no one in their life that should be a bigger cheerleader for them than you. So you encourage them, and you encourage them a little bit more. You believe in their potential. All the time we hear, you can be anything you want to be, right? But we should really mean that when we say that. Students need parents to believe that they're there for them no matter what. All right, so it's interesting because do you know what I've done correlates to me, especially with do you know what I can do? God created your child with a purpose. Ephesians 2:10 gives very specifics about that. Your child was created with purpose. So understanding those 4 questions will allow you to understand your student's identity a whole lot more. And so what I want you guys to do just sitting at your tables is kind of talk about these questions some. And when I mean that, you're not going to... The hope is for this group to find community with each other, to be able to talk about these things, but just to interact and to brainstorm, how can I live into these questions better? What are some specific things you think I can do? And so, again, with those 4 questions, if you guys didn't write them down, I'll get you guys to write them down, but I want you guys to discuss as a group what are ways to maybe help you engage your students with these questions. And the reason I say that is because like next week, we're going to talk about connecting with your student. All right, Michelle DeLon's going to teach on that, and we'll have some processing time with that. But as your students get older, you're going to have less and less time with them. And so how can you make the most of these small amounts of time, right? And then the following week, we're going to how to pray for your kids. Mark and Sonia Matson are going to lead that. Like, how can we pray intentionally for our kids better than, Lord, keep your hedge of protection over them, right? Lord, let them grow up and be this. But how can you pray effectively for your student to be a fully devoted, faithful follower of Jesus? Because praying for your student like that will also allow you to become more like that as well. And then the last one we're going to do in this 4-week session is going to be led by Paul and Laura Hughes, is how do you respond to your kid when you know what they've done? Right? How can you not lose your head and blow a gasket, but remember hope over shame? So again, the questions are, do you know what matters to me? Do you know where I live? Do you know what I've done? And then lastly, do you know what I can do? And so I want you guys to spend just like the next 15 minutes talking about these things. Again, how can I engage? What are ways that we can come up with this? How about that? Brainstorm together. What are ways that I can understand what matters to my kid? What are ways that I can understand what my kid can be? What are ways I can understand what my kid has done? Right? What are ways I can understand where my kid lives? So I want you guys, might be some awkwardness, but that's why we do these things, so that way we get rid of the awkwardness. And because in the end, we are a large church. It's hard to get to know everyone. And this is just, the more faces and people we know, the more we understand we're not in this alone. And so feel free to discuss and talk, and then I'll come and close us in prayer after that. Super. All right, thank you. Calibrate, yay. Okay.